what's going on.
Yeah, well, it's pretty exciting. We were shooting for a launch in October, and we are actually live with transactions in our alpha test. So there's about 50 people banging around trying to break things and sending us comments and stuff. So we're furiously working through those little fixes, but the core of the product is working perfectly, just as desired, and we're just trying to make things simpler and simpler. So ideally, we'll be live to our beta group, which is all the people that have signed up for early access over the past few months, sometime next week. And we'll probably give those people another 10 or 15 days to sort of be the first people in. And then we'll kind of be live to everybody in early or mid-November, which is great.
And when did development start?
I believe that we started coding on July 1st. So yeah, we had the idea April 10th, if I recall, kind of put the company together and got started and with the planning and then broke ground, did designs late May and all of June, and then broke ground July 1.
And what's been interesting or surprising about the development process, that things that maybe you didn't foresee or things that have popped up that have required extra attention?
Well, I mean, both you and I have had a front row seat to a lot of product development over the years. So I can't say that I'm surprised. I guess I'm like pleasantly surprised that we didn't miss our own internal deadlines by much. These things can often go horribly wrong. And can easily double or just never happen. So the fact that we're getting live, like my own, I guess the ego deadline was I wanted to get live within 6 months of having the idea. So I was trying to hit October 10th, and we got out by October 24th yesterday. So basically on a 6-month timeline, we missed by 2 weeks. I can't complain about that.
And why don't you talk about who's helping you from the development standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, some of them are not super public, but we've got a really good CTO who has built very large businesses and had multiple exits in the past. And similarly for our head of product, who's also responsible for most of the UX user experience and in fact, like pixel by pixel designs, also a really talented guy who's been part of a couple of major successes in startup land. And they're both Bitcoiners, which is how I know them. So it's just been, I mean, I'm just like absolutely thrilled with the original founding team. And then, we've obviously gotten some great help from the extended team and developers, supporting that vision and building it out. And that's all gone really well also.
Is it important to you that everyone involved is also an actual Bitcoiner as opposed to someone who's just working on the project? Or is that, how do you feel about that?
I like it if the people that are closest to it, especially people working on, marketing or essentially like carrying the voice of the company, it's pretty important that those are Bitcoiners. So obviously we've got, Brian, who's setting this up and producing this and all our, video and stuff like that, is a hardcore Bitcoiner and one of the organizers of the Orange County Bitcoin meetup. And so it's like important that someone in that role is a solid Bitcoiner. Sure. Otherwise, I think just an appreciation for it and some knowledge of it. You and I have been on this path next to each other. I got you into it, I think, only 6 or 7 months after I was getting involved, and your own knowledge of Bitcoin has skyrocketed, and I think appreciation for it, which is really cool. But in your role in particular, and this also goes for the person it looks like we're probably bringing on to help with the visuals and just kind of like making the curriculum more engaging in different media types. I would call him pretty much a new coiner. But I believe that for both you and for him, not only is it beneficial to us trying to sort of like do what's right for new coiners in onboarding them onto Bitcoin, it's actually great that you're not so ensconced in the echo chamber of Bitcoin Twitter like Brian and I are, because you ask better questions than we would. We kind of take for granted a lot of things that may not be obvious to a new coiner.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about it in a different conversation that we had, but I think it's interesting also the product, who the customer is here is sort of like this bifurcated market of like the people giving Bitcoin who presumably will be, people deeply ensconced in the world and true believers, and people have a lot of knowledge about it. And then the people receiving the Bitcoin who may know nothing or have a very like sort of superficial knowledge about it. And so it's interesting to have, I guess maybe that's a question I have for you. Who do you view as your customer base? Is it both those groups? Is it the givers because they're the ones who are, spending the money up front? Or how does that, what's your view of that, and how does that impact product development, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, like all we really are is a marketing and education company that sits on top of a payment processor and a custodian, right? So our job is like marketing and education. And I think we market to Bitcoiners for the most part, and we educate new coiners. So I think of those two audiences. The other just little detail is we market to Bitcoiners that want to give Bitcoin and evangelize and use this as sort of a scaled evangelism platform, but we also market to Bitcoiners that want to get more Bitcoin. And that's actually like a really interesting evangelism vector as well, because you've got, Gen Z and millennials that want to get more Bitcoin from friends and family, and they're pinging their boomer relatives and, sending them a link and saying, I want this Bitcoin thing for Christmas. And we kind of just came to this realization over the past couple of days that essentially the ones getting educated anytime somebody goes through the get Bitcoin flow are the givers. It's the people that respond to that get message. And so we're actually going to turn on, I've got to figure out the flow and how you actually position it. But if you are basically brought into the platform because somebody requested Bitcoin from you, you're actually going to start the clock on education for those people as well. So they'll start getting the emails, once a month for a year. If Timmy in college at Ohio State has asked for Bitcoin from Grandma Ethel, Ethel's going to start getting some education in her email over the next year.
Right.
If she makes a gift.
Well, let's talk about the curriculum and how much of that is, the point of Give Bitcoin. How important is it to the product, do you think?
I think it's paramount. It's kind of our reason for being. Like, I think if we don't do a good job and have like a pretty good success rate of converting recipients and also, givers on the get flow, we have to do a good job of converting lots of those people into Bitcoiners. We got to red pill them and start them down the rabbit hole and hope that they're reading ahead and hope that they start buying Bitcoin for themselves.
And how will you measure that if once their time lock is up, how will you know that it's been successful, I guess?
Well, I think we're going to have lots of indicators along the way. It won't just be at the end of their time lock, because we'll be able to track if they're opening emails, we'll be able to see if they're reading ahead, because anybody can go on the website and in a logged in state, read anything in any of the education. So you might get the first module in your email, but if you're interested, you'll be able to read ahead.
And one of the ways that I've been thinking about it, I'm curious how you feel about it, is that the gift that we're giving on some level is the time lock, is the time that, okay, you don't need to learn about, wallets and sort of like what to do with your Bitcoin, because there's literally nothing you can do with it out of the gate. And so what that gives you is a window to actually like learn on a sort of more zoomed out level, the philosophy behind it and why Bitcoin matters and the history of money and sort of the problems that Bitcoin solves. And so on some level, that's the way I've begun to view it. I'm curious if that resonates with you or if you view it in a similar way.
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think I believe you used the word patience in a note yesterday. And I think from the recipient's perspective, I think that's actually really important, that this isn't the type of thing. If you're impatient with Bitcoin, you're just going to get wrecked and you're going to wash out and you're going to, essentially, bounce off. Like Bitcoin, not to go all Drew from Unchained about this, but like Bitcoin is this thing that has its gravity. And like, if you're coming into Bitcoin and you go too fast, you're just going to bounce off of it and fly back out into space and never really get it. You've got to like approach it and slow down and get hooked by the gravity and land on Bitcoin and get involved,
Yeah, I mean, the metaphor I might use is almost like we're giving them the soil where that can grow. Like this knowledge is sort of like So the seed has somewhere to actually be planted and to blossom from.
Hat tip and held on the planting a tree metaphor.
Yeah, totally. So let's go back to sort of the origin story of, like, you talked about, that July 1st or around then, like what actually happened where this clicked for you as an idea that you were like, oh, there's something here and I should pursue this.
Yeah. So, well, funny, we just mentioned Dan Held, but it was actually, it was right after a happy hour that I put together with some Bitcoiners and also some of my normal, like, Silicon Valley tech CEO types up in SF. And yeah, we were trying to pitch Bitcoin to tech people, and just finding out how hard it is to do. As we all know, it's really hard to do in 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is. People have all kinds of other distractions, and it's not the kind of thing that you can really get that quickly, even if you have the best arrows in your quiver. And my personal story, which I've shared on a couple places, but just briefly, someone gave me some Bitcoin, trying to get me to get into Bitcoin in January of 2014. I, basically proceeded to not read the white paper, not start buying Bitcoin, and lose the private keys and don't have the Bitcoin. So that sucks.
Which is a common story. It's a common story, right?
Yeah. So in some ways, GiveBitcoin fixes this. And then later on, I got into Bitcoin in spring of 17 and, was convinced of it as a thing within, a few months, and basically spent like fall of 17 through, winter of 19. So finally got my parents, after about 18 months of trying to convince them to buy some, to get a little Bitcoin starting in March of this year. And again, I was looking at that and I was like, okay, I may not be like the most valuable employee or person ever, but like, that's a lot of time. It's got to be worth something. Probably better off, coming up with a better way to get someone interested in Bitcoin. And yeah, it was just a couple weeks later that I had that happy hour, and it was just, a couple beers deep after the happy hour and one more whiskey, ginger on the flight home, Southwest bus to LA. And yeah, just kind of sprang fully formed. I was like, well, you've got to give it, but you don't want them to sell it for Ripple or, trade it for a 20% gain against a inflatable US dollar. So you need to time lock it. And obviously, like, during that time lock, you should be educating them. So, I'd say like within a day, we had the bones of the product, and I started looking for people to build it with me and, writing out the plan. And it was just kind of like, unstoppable momentum from there.
And I think you're tapping into something that I think is curious about the Bitcoin community, which is this desire to evangelize it, or to turn on other people, or to kind of like, take someone who doesn't know anything about it and like shake them a little bit and be like, no, you got to know about this. Where do you think that comes from? Why? I guess, first of all, do you agree with that assessment? And why do you think that is such a common sort of notion within the community?
Yeah, well, I mean, you and I have known each other for like 17 years now or whatever. And I think we both made a bit of a study of, how people convince other people to do things.
Sure.
In some ways.
We both read Influence by Robert Cialdini, right?
Yeah, sure. I don't know. It's probably got too many books on that sort of thing. And definitely a background in evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology and how things spread and memes and languages and all those sorts of things. Bitcoin's really special. It really is. It's this thing that I think people can feel. You can feel better about evangelizing and being passionate and promoting Bitcoin than anything that I've ever come across. I think it basically is occupying for a lot of people like the space that the most sort of devout, basically like religious people might. And that would it would actually surpass people that are religious but also plugged into mainstream society. So,
what do you mean by that?
I'm saying that people that are hardcore Bitcoiners and very evangelical about it, they feel more mission driven than mainstream religious people that also go and have jobs and things like that. So a hardcore Bitcoiner almost becomes a bit of an ascetic and is basically only focused on Bitcoin, almost to the neglect, or just like not really thinking that other things are nearly as important. And I'm not really passing judgment on that one way or another. I'm just observing that appears to be a fact. Like Bitcoiners are more like, Quakers or Amish or, Jews in Israel living on the kibbutz that don't really want to have to deal necessarily with all of the mainstream society. Now that motivation is different for a Bitcoiner. I think it's because Bitcoiners that believe that Bitcoin will become global money and play that out, and you can kind of read, Safety and Amoose's book, The Bitcoin Standard, or, any of a million blog posts and podcasts on the subject. But as this thing plays out, like so many of the problems that we're trying to fix via politics and social movements and, left-wing ideology and right-wing ideology and all of these things, Bitcoin really will drastically alter the landscape on which all of these sort of, checker games, I won't even call them chess games, like all these checker games are being played. And, we may have a new set of issues and a new set of problems, but you can't really stop what's happening with Bitcoin, and it's going to drastically change all of those things. And, Bitcoiners believe, and I think many of them in their hearts and minds know that Bitcoin is going to be hugely positive for global society.
I'd speak to that a little bit more. I know we've talked about it already, but what are some of the ways that you think it's going to benefit society that are most notable?
Yeah, I mean, I think primary is probably just expanding the size of a friction-free market. So if you can just have, essentially one money that people can use globally, it just enables much more coordination, and commercial coordination throughout history generally brings peace. So if, neighbors that were warring can do business together very easily, they basically just find that, money is the grease that coordinates society. I mean, the longest running, most powerful empire in history that's like never talked about because they didn't have any wars was pretty much like Phoenician trading society, which ran for like 2,500 years and created all these great cities and societies and kind of the roots of classical culture. But because they didn't fight, because all they were doing, they were just commercial. It was a commercial empire. They just traded and they sailed the seas. And I think it's super interesting and not coincidental that a Lebanese author and writer, Nassim Taleb, has more or less become like the adopted philosopher of Bitcoin.
Interesting. And I want to backtrack a little bit to, you talked about trying to get your family involved with Bitcoin. When you've been pitching Bitcoin to friends and family, I think it's a common thing is like, where do I start when I'm trying to convince people that this is something they should be paying attention to, or that they should have some, what have you found to be resonant ways, or have you heard stories from other people that you think are relevant or effective?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we wouldn't be building this product if we didn't think that for some people, some of the time there's a better way, and that essentially software can help scale the efforts of software and media basically can help scale the efforts of someone that's trying to onboard someone else. I've certainly onboarded, dozens of Bitcoiners myself. And it's always different and it's always laborious. Right. And it's a passion. It's a labor of love for sure to try to overcome someone's skepticism. I mean, you're among, 5 or 6 like close friends that I've gotten involved, and it's been a lot of hours with each of them.
Sure.
Has it been basically forced you into this by helping you get work in the space? And I was like, well, maybe if you're getting paid to have to read about this stuff, you'll learn about it.
Yeah. Once you get in, it's, it sort of washes over you in a way that things start to make sense. But yeah. I think there's also this discrepancy between how it's presented within, the mainstream media, or on, the superficial way it's discussed, like in the news in general, versus what the Bitcoin community, the conversations that are going on there, and the sort of depthful sort of education you can get that way. And I guess we see this in a lot of areas of life, but if you're just kind of going by how it's presented in the mainstream media, oftentimes it's just something to be afraid of, or it's some scam or something like that, without even knowing what they're talking about.
Or it's just number go up. I mean, this thing always gets the most attention when the price spikes, right? So on a day like today, when, for whatever reason, and anybody tells you they know, doesn't know, but, Bitcoin's up 15% today. Who knows why?
Right.
There'll be a lot more headlines today and a lot more people buying after it goes up. And, obviously media attention was spectacularly high around the price run up in late 2017. What may not be as apparent is like the media coverage today, still coming out of a bear market, is, significantly more than it was before that last bull market, and the quality of it, and the, the number of people, whether it's, Joe Squawk on CNBC, or, most of the Real Vision, like Raoul Pal and those guys, and Dan Tapiero doing lots of appearances and talking about Bitcoin. People like Travis Kling and Anthony Pompliano and Melton Demirors, sort of getting on TV pretty regularly and going to congressional hearings, as Melton did, and talking about Bitcoin. The media coverage didn't go nearly down into the trough that the price did. And so
Right.
I think that the level of understanding and education, easily 10x from mid 2017 to mid 2019. Most of the books that everybody recommends came out since then. I could flip my camera over here and point out, the Bitcoin Standard and Inventing Bitcoin by Jan Pritzker, and the Little Bitcoin book by Alex Gladstein and Jimmy Song and friends. Like, those are all new.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
most of these podcasts weren't out. Like Stefan Livera podcast didn't exist in 2017. It started in 2018. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's almost like there's been an evolution of how people are able to explain it along the way. That's been growing, which has been interesting to see. One thing I want to talk about, and let me take a second and shout out. We've got the Bitcoin Rabbi and Gary Leland are both watching, so I want to give those guys a shout out. And once again, if anyone has any questions that they want to ask, we've got a few minutes left here. So
if you don't already have Michael's book by the Bitcoin Rabbi, Bitcoin Money, go pick that up. He did something very close to our hearts earlier this year, which was basically collect donations to buy a copy of that book for each of the 535 congressional reps and senators, and send it to them. We loved that. I participated, obviously. And we definitely want to do something similar at some point with Give Bitcoin. We found out that you can give up to $50. So I think we're going to try to do a little crowdfunding and source 25 Gs to give $49.99 to each of the reps and Congress people through this platform. So more on that, probably like a Q1 thing.
Nice. Is there anyone else that you've been coming across or reading or interacting with lately that is worth other people paying attention to?
I mean, every day, yeah, for sure. We're doing a lot with this, trying to get the educational message across through as many different types of media as we can. So, we're obviously putting this out in text. We're definitely going to be doing audio. You've been experimenting with, some of it being sort of like just regular prose, but also like a Q&A format, which I think lends itself nicely to some video. So in that vein, I think what Guy Swan has been doing with the crypto economy, which is basically just, really nice, high quality, well enunciated readouts of some of the best Bitcoin written content. I just think something like that provides an insanely powerful service. I think we actually started the trend of creating transcripts of podcasts so that it was much more easily searchable. That was an idea that I had for Stefan's podcast, and we've been sponsoring that for the past 4 or 5 months or so. And he's obviously been able to make all of the content that would otherwise just sit in a podcast available in text and searchable and indexable by Google. So
Right.
I think that's super important.
Just so people know, that's Stefan Livera's podcast, and the transcripts are available at the Give Bitcoin blog.
That's right. Nice plug. Love it.
Yeah.
I think visuals are going to becoming increasingly important. So, some of the stuff that obviously that the rabbi did with his book, a lot of the stuff that Jason Don, Brecky von Bitcoin, he goes by, is doing with art and experimenting with some comics and graphic novels type things. That's something that we're looking at as well. I don't know if we'll have it ready for launch, but we've been talking about doing like 2 to 4 page, 6 panel pages of sort of illustrations of key aspects of each lesson or module for the education. I think that'll be really neat.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be like an iteration process too, of like coming out with a minimal viable product. But I think we're going to be adding on sort of a lot of the visual and audio content and video content as well. I think there's going to be interesting sort of
Yeah.
growth that comes along here too.
Yeah, for sure. And, we certainly have enough people involved as advisors and part owners of the company to hammer us if we're not doing a great job. Jan Pritzker, who's the writer of Inventing Bitcoin, is obviously helping us quite a bit with advice and just thinking about how to structure this. And, he pointed out, like, your emails had better be, run through some pretty serious A/B testing. Like, you better try a lot of different subject lines to figure out, what causes people to actually open up your education. And I was like, yes, that's right. We need to do that. So now we're looking at tools to make sure that the open rates are super high and that people are actually getting this education. Because, it's the goal is really creating Bitcoiners. And that means, there are like probably 50 or 100 different dials that you can turn on. And, over time, maybe as we get more traction and more money to work with, basically, and can hire more people, whatever, things like talking with a different voice or a different packaging or whatever it is for someone who might be 60 versus someone who's 13 and got a bunch of Bitcoin for their bar mitzvah or something like that.
Sure. Well, we're almost at the half-hour mark. Is there any other topics that you want to cover, or anything else to mention that you think is specifically worth discussing?
Yeah, well, I should mention, especially since he's watching, Gary Leland is the most recent addition to our advisory board. So, longtime podcaster. He's the founder of the BitBlock Boom conference, which just had a really nice attendance and got a lot of press a few months ago in Dallas. So thrilled to have Gary involved now, and I think we can learn a lot from him around media. I think we've done a good job, kind of scaling this thing with code, and we're just getting our feet wet thinking about how to spread the message of Bitcoin and give Bitcoin through media. So thrilled to have him allied with us. Did we have any questions come in from anybody?
I don't believe we did, or I haven't seen them. So
we'll collect some. Obviously, not that many people usually watch synchronous, but we get a lot of views on these over time. So maybe next time we'll answer some of the questions that people add.
Yeah, definitely. If anyone out there wants to add us on Twitter with any questions, we can work them into the next time we do this, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, for sure. And again, can sign up for the live date, GiveBitcoin.io, and yeah, we think it's going to be a really fun holiday season with people giving and getting Bitcoin through this platform. So yeah, what do we say? Give, get, stack with Give Bitcoin.
All right, sounds good. Anything else, Cory?
All set.
All right,
Thanks a lot.
good talk.